This morning is fourth session, and we're going to have another session after this. But as we start, and as I mentioned yesterday, we started the first two sessions really talking about this idea of a different metric for maturity, and after we wrestled through that, we then talked about the idea of where each of our churches are at in regards to our approach to discipleship. We then looked more on the leadership side of things with flipping the classroom, and today I'm going to be talking about how your discipleship pathway and your leadership pipeline need to be distinct, why they need to be distinct, and a path forward in thinking through this, and possibly how to work with the other departments and areas in your church as well. So let's pray and we'll get started. Lord, I pray that you would fill us with your Holy Spirit, that you would guide our thoughts, Lord, as we reflect on our ministry and the way that our churches are organized. Lord, that we would not think of this like a reorg, or think of this like this is my responsibility and that's your responsibility, or even think of this all as the same thing. God, we just pray that you would show us ways to better disciple and better equip the saints for the work of ministry. Not for our sake, not for our church's sake, but for your glory and your kingdom. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Well, as a child, how many of you recognize what this is? I remember flipping through an Encyclopedia Britannica as a child, and you might think I had no life as a child looking through the Encyclopedia Britannica, but literally, if you had this kind of encyclopedia with this type of gold trim, you would want to look at it, right? It's like a burgundy-bonded, leather-bounded, limited edition set of the Encyclopedia Britannica that I had as a child. Now, to this day, I don't know how much my parents paid for this entire set, nor how they justified spending so much when we weren't wealthy by any means. But as I reflect on this, I wonder how much of this is really, if it was really more of a symbol of the sacrifice that they made to give up everything, to leave what was normal, to move to a foreign land in the hope for a better future. And I wonder if that's why they bought this for my sisters and I. In any case, they must have had, if that's what it was, they must have had really big dreams for my sisters and I, because they went all out, right? As I reflect back on this time in my life, though, as a child, looking at this set of, first it was World Book Encyclopedia. It wasn't that nice. I think it was the basic starter set. Well, they had the children's encyclopedia first, and then it was the World Book, and then they upgraded and went to the Encyclopedia Britannica. And as I reflect back on that time in my life, I remember times where I would actually open this up and begin looking through these encyclopedias because I loved learning. Now, just to give you a glimpse into who I was as a kid, what kind of kid I was, I had my life entirely planned out from when I was grade 5. Like literally, it was entirely all planned out. I was going to go to Harvard, medical school for my undergrad, and then I was going to do Harvard Medical School, and then I was going to go to Johns Hopkins for a fellowship. I was going to become a neurosurgeon. And my parents, obviously as immigrants, loved the fact that these were my dreams. I don't know if they whispered them to me in my unconscious as a little child, but I came up with it. I remember making the decision that I was going to do this. And for my class project, I actually, it was email, right? It was like CompuServe email at the time. So I CompuServed emailed Harvard, and I asked for a prospectus. I didn't tell them how old I was, but they sent me a prospectus, right? And I included that in with my project for the 5th grade and what courses I was going to take. And I had the whole thing planned out as a 5th grader. And as you can see, I was completely right in all of my projections, right? If you look at my bio. So since I wanted to be a doctor, I guess it's no surprise that my favorite section was the human anatomy, right? Here's a little bit of a screenshot there, but if you look here, I was talking to you yesterday about this idea of the transparencies, and while I was writing the book initially, this is actually the encyclopedia from my parents' house. I was like, I wonder, as I was writing through No Silver Bullets, I was like, I wonder how much it would be to to buy this and if my memory was right. And I looked online, and you can't even buy these anymore. I mean, you can go on Etsy and maybe buy one of these transparencies for like $25, not even the entire encyclopedia, but they just don't make it. And as I was looking through this and thinking back on that time of my life, I remember being fascinated because it would show me, right, the muscular system, the respiratory system, the lymphatic system, and the skeletal system. And you just kind of go back and forth and see all the systems of the human body. Now, when you reflect back on that, it's such a neat way to think about the way God has designed the human body to work. But while pastoring and thinking through the time that I spend with church leaders, I couldn't help but notice the fact that just like the human body has systems like this, so does the church. Right? Just like the human body has different layers of systems, so does the church. And while the systems all need to work by itself, with itself, throughout the entire body for it to function, you can't separate out one system from the other. So just like each of the systems in the human body are also designed to work together toward one purpose, with one another, as much as they need to work by themselves, they need to work with one another. Well, so does the church. I mean, think about 1 Corinthians 12. Verse 14 says, "Indeed, the body is not one part but many." And in verse 18, it says, "God has arranged each one of the parts in the body just as he wanted." So my question for you this morning is, what are those systems for your church? What are the parallels for your church? And I'm not saying that the ear is the counseling ministry, the mouth is the word ministry, and the hand is the mercy ministry. I'm not asking you to parallel it like that. I'm just asking you to reflect on, are there similar types of systems in your church that need to work independently but also need to work together? Now, before we get there and identify two of the overarching core systems that every church shares, let me share with you why I love IKEA. All right, and now, this is not a subtle sponsored, like American Idol, you have like the Coke right there. It's just like perfectly positioned. That's not what this is. Now, I wouldn't mind it if IKEA sponsored me, because I do love talking to them. That's not what it is. Now, the thing about IKEA, I've heard some people parallel IKEA's showroom to Dante's 9 levels of purgatory. I've heard that, but I actually really do like it. I'm not saying that I like purgatory. I'm not saying that I like Dante. That's not what I like. I'm talking about IKEA, right? So let's get that straight. And this is fascinating to me. As I was reflecting on why I so like IKEA, the tension that I have is I love IKEA, but I hate shopping. There's nothing that drains me fast. Like on my Sabbath, when we are resting, delighting in God, enjoying His presence, reading the Word, and we're celebrating with our church. On the Sabbath, the last thing that I want to do is go to a shopping mall. Now, I don't mind going to IKEA, but I just hate shopping malls. I mean, just take a look at this picture here. This is a picture that I sketched up of a girl shopping at a mall and a guy shopping at a mall. I'm sure you can guess which is which. Now, I think I have a pretty good level of authority to speak to this because I grew up with 3 older sisters who always dragged me along shopping. And my mom loves to take me shopping because she always thinks, Daniel, you need a new pair of shoes. And I'm like, my shoes are fine. Like they don't have a hole underneath. I'm fine. And she's like, no, you need a new pair of shoes. Let me go. I was like, no, you need a suit. And I was like, I don't wear suits. The last time I wore a suit was a funeral, and it's just, I have my funeral suit, right? But I don't need, 5 different suits. And she's like, okay. Well, maybe I'll take you. Maybe you need a new shirt. I was like, I'm fine, Mom. And that was how it was growing up. Now, the fascinating thing about this diagram, right? It really does show the different ways that guys and girls shop. The interesting thing about this, if you look at the pattern and going from one shop to the next, this is how I shop at a normal mall, but that's not how I shop at IKEA. Because you can't, right? If you wanted to go to IKEA to buy one thing, you can't just go to that one thing. You literally have to walk through the entire showroom. And I know they have those shortcuts, you know what I'm talking about, where you just go through these doors that it looks like employees are only supposed to go through, and you go through, and it's like this way to the showroom, you go through and you're still in another section. So when you think about this, right, when you think about IKEA and the fact that I hate shopping, but I love IKEA, I remember this one Sunday after preaching, one of our congregants came up, and she came up with a smile, and I was thinking, oh, she's going to talk about how the sermon blessed her and how something, it was just one of those looks, right, where she wasn't going to come and complain about anything I said, but it was just more of a smile, and she was going to give me some encouragement. I knew this, just through the look of her eyes. And she came up and she was like, Daniel, I am going to go to Memphis this week, and they have an IKEA there. I've never been to an IKEA. I wasn't even talking about IKEA that Sunday. Right? But she's like, I'm going to be going to IKEA this upcoming week, and I want you to let me know, what I need to do and how I should prepare for going to IKEA. And immediately I was like, I'm glad that's what you took out of the sermon. Right? But maybe I do talk about IKEA that much. So seriously, through all this, I was trying to figure out why it is that I like IKEA so much, and why it is that I feel differently about IKEA than any other shopping mall or center. Now, after thinking about this for a while, I discovered that my love for IKEA wasn't because of the as-is section, or the cheap food, or the low prices. What I love about IKEA is that there's no salesman harassing me and following me around. In fact, they have the opposite problem. If you want help, you can't find it. I didn't have to worry, really, what I liked about IKEA is that I didn't have to worry about someone trying to upsell me for commission or to meet their quota. I could just look around, I could shop guilt-free and pressure-free. Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter calls this a strategic trade-off. What are the strategic trade-offs in your church? When you break it down, IKEA and every other furniture retailer basically share the same 50,000-foot vision, which is to make furniture great again, right? I mean, isn't that what every furniture retailer wants to do? I mean, for any business, doesn't the bottom line ultimately drive everything? What's interesting, though, about this is the way that IKEA goes about selling furniture. It's distinctly different than any other retailer out there. For example, I had to buy a bunk bed for my girls. My girls are 9.5 and 8 right now, and I have a 4-year-old son. And a few years back, when I had to buy a bunk bed for them, I had a particular one in mind. Actually, look at this picture. This is the one that we bought. And I wanted to buy this. This was when we were living in Edmonton. We had a 1958 bungalow. We bought it because we watched, the Flip or Flop and, all the renovation shows, and we thought we could do that too. Oh man, it was horrible. It was a 1958 bungalow. Yes, I don't need to go into all the horrors of renovation, but we wanted to buy this because we only had 1,050 square feet. It was our first home. And we needed as much space as possible. So they shared a room, and I wanted a bunk bed with stairs in the bunk bed. Now, IKEA didn't sell, and I don't think IKEA still doesn't sell a bunk bed like this. So I had to look through the competition and look through and find a furniture retailer, who had this. I looked it up online. I saw all the additions. I was like, I'm going to buy this. I'm not going to buy the things underneath. I'm not going to do that add-on. I'm going to buy this particular color. I'm going to do this. And I had it all planned out because I didn't want to be upsold. So I went into the big block store, knowing that they were trying to upsell me. I did all my research. And upon entering into the store, lo and behold, this is when a salesman spotted us. Right? And when I walked through the doors and the salesman spotted us, that's when he began his descent. I felt like I was in one of those Planet Earth movies. At this time of year, salesmen only succeed once in every 20 hunts. If the hunter salesman is skinny like this one, capturing his prey by making the sale may not be enough, but all he can really do is keep trying. Now, to prevent his scent from betraying him, the salesman makes a wide sweep so as not to be detected. Getting close, he comes right behind the customer, approaching and walking in, and then he attacks. Amazing. he brings out his best sales pitch. His negotiation tactics are sharp because the recently attended seminar that he did with an FBI agent. Although he ultimately wants to make the sale himself so he doesn't have to split the commission, making a sale is better than no sale at all, so he calls on the other salesman to help him. And he gets it. He brings out the buy one, get one offer. He says it's limited to only today, and when it looks like he's about to close the sale, the customer says the dreaded words, "I have to talk to my wife about it." Now we laugh, right? I mean, honestly though, this is honestly how I feel every time I walk into a retailer, right? It really does, except IKEA. Now think about strategic trade-offs, right? IKEA made a particular set of strategic trade-offs that have not only led to their enduring success, but it's actually endeared many people to them. So what sort of strategic trade-offs did they make, and what sort of strategic trade-offs do you need to make in your church? Now, in order to understand what a strategic trade-off is, we need to first understand what strategy is. And in a nutshell, strategy is not your game plan. And strategy is not just your game plan. It's what gets you from point A to point B. In other words, strategy is a sum of all your decisions. It's both what you choose not to do, and it's also what you choose to do. It's because when you choose not to do something, you're actually opening up the opportunity to do something else better. And that's the very definition of a strategic trade-off. So for example, IKEA chooses their strategic trade-off. They choose not to have an army of sales associates on the floor in order to keep their furniture prices low. The trade-off is that I need to grab my own furniture and supplies when I need them. Right? Compare that to a traditional furniture retailer who will deliver the furniture to my house, sometimes even assemble it for me. The trade-off, though, is that I will likely pay a higher price since there are more people who need to get paid along the process. Now, Michael Porter, in his article on this topic, goes on to say that organizations that refuse to make strategic trade-offs, and listen to this, and try to be all things to all customers, actually risk confusion. Think about that. Trying to be all things to all customers, organizations who do this risk confusion. Does your church try to be all things to all people? And as a result, your program, ministries, everything just keeps on getting added one on top of another? Little ministry here, little ministry there. It's not going to hurt anyone else, especially if it's led by a lay leader. And what if the lay leader leaves? And who takes over that? And then this. And how many of our churches, as we grow larger, just end up adding little ministries here and there without stopping anything? Organizations that try to be all things to all customers risk confusion. Now, I'm not saying our congregants are customers, right? Michael Porter's obviously talking about it from a business perspective, but it's a fascinating idea to think through. And since organizations that try to be all things to all people don't have a clear framework, saying yes and no to opportunities really just end up being decisions based on what you ate, how you're feeling, whether you're stressed, whether someone is, the persistent widow or not, and whether or not you're slammed. In other words, you either end up saying yes to everything or no to everything. In either case, the result is rampant ineffectiveness and mediocrity. And we see this in our churches, don't we? I mean, when's the last time you shut a ministry down? A ministry that everyone knew needed to be shut down. And everyone knows the effectiveness of it. I mean, it peaked 20 years ago. But man, if you want to keep your job, you better not shut that ministry down. Is pretty much how you feel. How many of you have felt that? I mean, doesn't it eventually get to the point where there's so many programs to choose from that resources get spread thin, that everyone fights for a spot in the bulletin? Everyone spots for that coveted announcement or a banner on the website? Or a place on the wall, or posters along the church, and everyone's fighting for it, and you can't please anyone. Even if the person that has been fighting for it for the last year finally gets a stage announcement, after the stage announcement, they are still not happy. I mean, doesn't it get to the point where there's so many programs to choose from that messaging becomes confusing and newcomers just end up having no idea what to do or where to go? And as a result, what happens? People just end up doing what's easiest, which is going back out the door that they came in. We think more programs will shut the back door, but it actually doesn't. It just makes it wider because there's so much confusion as to what to do. Strategy is not about doing anything and everything to get from point A to point B. That's not what strategy is. Strategy is about first saying no to the good, extra, and peripheral before you can say yes to the great, focused, and opportune. Right? Strategy is first and foremost about saying no to the good, extra, and peripheral so that you can say yes to the great, focused, and opportune. So let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question about all of this. What do you need to stop doing in order to fulfill the vision that God has called your church to? Yeah, let's stick to... What do you need to stop doing in order to fulfill the vision that God has called you to? What do you need to stop doing? I mean, imagine if every time someone came to you with a proposal to start a new ministry, you said, I love that idea. But what are you going to stop doing before this? In fact, what if every time someone came to you with a proposal for a new ministry, you said, okay, let's do it. I trust you. I believe that you've done the research. If you haven't, then, go back and do it. But if, let's say they've checked out, they dotted all their I's, they've crossed their T's, they see the need for it, they have a lay leader who's going to move it forward, and they're going to be doing that, then you're like, okay, let's do it. But first and foremost, what ministry are you going to stop? And what ministry are you going to refine before you start this? And if they come back and they're like, yeah, but Daniel, I mean, I'm not going to be leading this. It's a lay leader that's going to be leading it. And I'm just going to be supporting them. I'm going to be praying for them. I'm just going to be helping them find a room in the church. I'm going to be just helping them in that way. And you're like, okay, great. That's fine. I love the fact that it's a lay leader that's leading it rather than you. But what if they leave after a year and they haven't found their replacement? And what if it's succeeded? Like, what if the ministry was actually making a significant impact in people's lives? The ministry was developing disciples, reaching the lost for Christ, and the lay leader left without a replacement. Would you have the ability to shut it down and to tell everyone that it wasn't going to happen? Or do you think you're just going to take it on in the interim? Which eventually becomes not the interim, right? I mean, that's what ends up happening, right? So imagine what would happen if you always approach new ministry initiatives like that. Even personally, even if you are the decision maker, and even when you propose an idea for a ministry to the senior pastor or the lead pastor or whoever else in the church, what if you came with, I would love to do this, but this is what I'm going to stop, and this is what I'm going to refine before I start this. Imagine what that would do to the culture of your church. Now, if you want to go a little bit further down the road and be a little bit more radical, every time something is started, you start one, you stop two, and you refine three. Imagine what that would look like. In a couple of years, a lot of these peripheral programs and ministries would end up going away, which would allow you and put you in a place where you can start something great. What if every time you started one, you stopped two, and you refined three? Imagine what would happen to the culture of your church. Now, the fact is, right, you can't just keep on saying yes. Right? We can't just keep on saying yes to more and more and more. You can't fully implement a pipeline to develop leaders, right? A leadership pipeline. You can't fully implement a leadership pipeline unless you first say no to something else. You can't fully implement a discipleship pathway until you first say no to something else. So what is that no going to be? All right, so let's get back to the encyclopedia and the two core systems of your church. I wanted to take a moment and overview what strategy was and the concept of strategic trade-offs, just to give you the framework around introducing something new and just looking at your ministry just a little bit different. Because I feel like a lot of times we'll look at our church and we'll look at our ministry more through the lens of, men's ministry, women's ministry, age, stage, different groups. And we'll look at it typically the way that we've always looked at ministry. But imagine what it would look like if we viewed our church through the lens of the two core systems of your church. Right, the two core systems of your church. And if you looked at your church and the way that it was structured around the two core systems of your church, and you saw this as the strategy of your church, right? If you did this, you would discover that they are actually, that the core systems of your church and the strategy of your church are synonymous. In other words, everything your church does, just think about it like this: men's ministry, women's ministry, small group, Sunday school, volunteer development, mercy ministry, church planning, every single worship ministry, every single thing that your church does all falls under the two core systems of your church, which are your discipleship pathway and your leadership pipeline. Right? These are the two core systems of your church. And when you have these two systems working with one another, right, and you have them working with one another, they're not the same thing, like I mentioned yesterday. When you have them working with one another, you will actually have a clearer framework around what to say yes to, what to say no to, and how to get to that vision that God has called your church to. They are not the same thing. For you to get to the vision that God has called your church to, you need to disciple and you need to equip. You need to disciple people toward Christ's likeness, and you need to equip the saints for the work of ministry. Right? Your discipleship pathway is the intentional route that you have set up in your church to develop and form disciples for kingdom impact, while your leadership pipeline is the process and structure you have put in place to equip leaders. The two go hand in hand. These two systems are the framework of your church's strategy. Just look at this. For example, your discipleship pathway will form disciples, whereas your leadership pipeline will equip disciples. Your discipleship pathway will shape your people's character, while your leadership pipeline will develop their competencies. Your discipleship pathway will transform hearts, while your leadership pipeline will train transforming agents. Your discipleship pathway will develop, whereas your leadership pipeline will deploy. Using an analogy, if your church were a car and had to get to a particular endpoint, which would be the vision that God has called your church to, your discipleship pathway would be the fuel, and your leadership pipeline would be the engine. Both are equally important, and they have to rely on each other if the car is going to experience any movement. And you can think about it like a double helix. One strand is your discipleship pathway, and the other strand is your leadership pipeline. They are distinct, they are different, yet they're intricately tied together. So like I mentioned yesterday, I'm a part of the team at Lifeway called Lifeway Leadership. And our team at Lifeway Leadership, the number one thing that we do is help churches develop leaders. Out of that research I shared, the fact that 3/4 of churches say that leadership development is important, but only a quarter have a plan in place to do something about it. So we help churches. We've helped, I think now, as I saw, because we have a team in Houston right now doing coaching there, it's now over 4,000 church leaders have gone through our leadership pipeline process. All right, so that's what I do at Lifeway Leadership. That's what our team does. And if you want a book that's going to help you develop this, take a look at Design to Lead by Eric Geiger and Kevin Peck. The last 2 chapters of that book are the research that our team did on leadership pipeline, on competencies, and that's what we coach churches around and through. My book, No Silver Bullets, is on the other hand, that's the leadership pipeline. No Silver Bullets is it's the steps that you need to take in order to develop a discipleship pathway in your church, right? So it really is they're moving together like a double helix. I mean, think about it like this, right? Because I know some people have said that leadership is just advanced discipleship. And you're like, Daniel, aren't you just confusing things? Aren't they really the same thing? And, isn't there so much overlap? Why are you trying to complicate this by putting them as the same thing? And the danger of seeing them as the same process and trying to simplify it and have it as one thing, the danger of that is that if it is truly the same thing, discipleship and leadership, what you believe on one and what you train toward one, you will actually assume on the other. Right? Here's the example. Leadership, if you have a volunteer, small group leader, or Sunday school class teacher that you want to elevate to becoming a coach, right? And you want to elevate them, they may keep on leading their class or their group. They may, or they might not. And they might just move into that coach role. If you are wanting to do that, there are certain characteristics that you are looking for that coach that not every leader has, right? And there are certain characteristics that they might actually be a really great small group leader or Sunday school class teacher, but a horrible coach. We all know that, especially in this room. We get that. But when you think about a coach, what every coach needs to do well is that they not only have to be a good leader, and they not only have to lead themselves well, they need to know how to lead others. But it's not just about leading others, because small group leaders need to know how to lead others, right? A host within a small group or a coordinator, they need to learn how to lead themselves, right? Because they need to get their job done, show up on time. They need to lead themselves, right? So a volunteer in a small group ministry, in a small group or in a Sunday school class, they need to lead themselves well. A small group leader or Sunday school teacher needs to lead others, right? Lead themselves, lead others. But a coach needs to know how to lead through others, right? They need to, volunteers lead themselves, leaders lead others, coaches lead through others, and directors or ministers of education need to know how to lead through teams. Right? You see how the competencies move up and the progression elevates as you go up the leadership pipeline. Now here's the thing. You may not know how to lead through teams, but you can teach someone how to lead themselves well, right? You can teach that. Not everyone knows how to do that, but you can give them the knowledge, you can give them experience, and you can coach them to know how to lead themselves well. Think about it like driving. When you learn how to drive, in order to learn how to drive, you needed knowledge. You needed to study the manual. You needed to learn the road, the rules on the road. You needed to know how long, stop sign, this, that, yield, roundabouts. You need to get knowledge. But it wasn't just knowledge, because you might have remembered. I remember the first time I studied the manual back and front. I thought I was a perfect, excellent driver. Like I was going to nail it the first time on the road, because I played a lot of car racing video games. Right? And I would practice sitting in the passenger seat, going like this with my dad, right? And going like this, and I tried. I was all ready, and I memorized everything in the manual. First time I was in the driver's seat, we were going like 5 miles an hour, and I was like, this is too fast. Because I needed the experience. But as I grew in experience, it wasn't just knowledge and experience. I needed coaching, because I didn't know what I didn't know. Right? I had blind spots. So knowledge, experience, and coaching. So when you think about leadership, right, you can give someone the knowledge. You can put them in opportunities where they, develop and run through the experience to lead themselves well, and then you can give them coaching, right? And they can learn how to lead themselves well because they can do it time after time after time, right? Check mark. Okay, now that someone knows how to lead themselves, you can then teach them, give them the knowledge, experience, and coaching to know how to lead others. Right? You can learn these competencies. And when someone learns how to do that, you can then teach them how to lead through others, or lead through leaders, and then lead through teams. All of these things, everything along the leadership pipeline, some things may come more naturally to some individuals than others, because they might be intuitively better leaders or have gotten training somewhere else. But every single aspect along the leadership pipeline, you can check off and you can grow. You can do this. Think about discipleship. This doesn't really operate the same way, does it? Whether you use the 8 signposts or attributes or markers, output goals that we talked about yesterday, or you use the fruit of the Spirit, There is no way that you could disciple someone to the point where they say love, joy, peace, patience, exercising faith, obeying God and denying self, humility, right? There's no way that you can check off any of these aspects when it comes to discipleship, because the moment you do that is probably, you only know a little bit, and I love what J.I. Packer talks about when it comes to spiritual formation. He says, it's kind of like you're going through an ever-spiraling tower, where you're learning about Christology, pneumatology, all bibliology, all the different ologies, and the next time you go around and you go to Christology again, it actually is deeper, it's different, because everything else has informed it, right? And the moment you think you know everything, kind of like the Pilgrim's Progress, right, you break through the clouds and you realize there's another, it just keeps on going up, right? That's how spiritual formation is, right? It's this ongoing direction without an endpoint on this side of eternity. As we point ourselves toward Christ, and the Holy Spirit changes us and shapes us, and we go through valleys and mountains and deserts, right? That's spiritual formation, isn't it? You can't check that off. The problem is, and this is why they need to be distinct, if they are the same thing, then truly, just like you can develop leadership competencies in your pipeline and check them off, people would assume that you could do the same when it comes to discipleship. And I wonder if that's why so many individuals in our church know a lot about God, but they don't know God. I wonder if that's the case, because they look at their shelves and they're like, look at all the Bible studies I've been through. There's no sermon I've not heard preached, right? There's even like an indent in the pew because they've been sitting in that one pew for decades. Right? We have a lot of individuals like that. And you're like, yeah, but where's the fruit in your life? That's why they need to be distinct, because what we believe on one will assume on the other. Now, you can't possibly achieve the vision that God has called your church to or ministry to without both a discipleship pathway and a leadership pipeline. In other words, without the right systems in place, two core systems right there, without the right systems in place in your church or ministry, you'll be like a hamster on a spinning wheel. It'll seem like you're doing a lot, right? It'll seem like there's a lot of action and ministry and busyness going on, but with little to no movement and little to no kingdom impact, because you might be actually counteracting the progression with your leadership pipeline and your discipleship pathway if they're not working with one another. Another way to put it is your leadership pipeline and your discipleship pathway are the trellis for your church to reach the lost, to make disciples of all nations, and to be a part of the kingdom work in your neighborhood. Now, when I visited my parents last Christmas, I went straight to the encyclopedias, like this one particularly. And when I went straight to their encyclopedias, I wanted to see if my memory served me correct about these transparencies. So when I arrived, I beelined to the encyclopedias. I picked this up. There was some dust on it. I blew it off, right? I cracked open the volume, and it was like I was transported back in time. Now, I don't think this volume had been opened since I was a kid or since I last wrote a biology paper in high school. But this encyclopedia, the fascinating thing about this is that it went from being a valued source of reference knowledge to a mere relic of the past. My sister even commented to me while I was looking at this. She was like, how do you know that any of that is still right? What's changed in the last 20-something years? And the sad fact is, as I was looking at this and reflecting on this, there are actually no more encyclopedia salesmen, are there? Volumes like this are either at Goodwill, in landfills, or collecting dust on boomers' bookshelves. And I'm sure the same could be said for conference notebooks and your own ministry library. You took a lot of good notes during BACE. I'm sure you took a lot of good notes during previous BACE conferences. But have you looked at them again, or have you done something differently since then? Or is it perhaps you come and you get inspired and you go back wanting to change something, but then the whirlwind of ministry picks you up and you just get back into it? And you're like, I'll get to it one day, I'll get to it one day. Maybe your spouse tries to throw the notebooks away, and you're like, no, you can't throw that away. I'm going to use it. Well, when's the last time you looked at it? Well, 5 years ago, but I will use it one day. Perhaps that's what a lot of conference notebooks are like in your library and books. So I guess my question to you today, in light of the metrics for maturity yesterday and the influences matrix, where your church is at, flipping the classroom yesterday, and also this morning when I talked to you about discipleship pathway and a leadership pipeline and how they are distinct, but you need to work with them together and outline and put them forward together in order to move forward and to achieve the vision that your church, that God has called your church to. In light of all of this that we've talked about, what are you going to start, stop, and refine? And I want to encourage you, right? I mean, the conference isn't over yet, but I want to encourage you on the flight back home, on the drive back home, on however long it takes you to get back to your place of ministry. I encourage you, before you file the notebook away and hang up your bag, I want you to think about what is something that you can start, something you can stop, and something you can refine before you go back and check your email again or prepare for the weekend. What can you start, what can you stop, and what can you refine? All right, I think I have a few minutes left if you all want to do some questions and answers. How much time, John? About 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Okay, perfect. So any questions on this or anything else that I've talked about? I mean, there's a lot of everything that I've really talked about has come out of No Silver Bullets, so that's a great resource for you to continue learning and moving forward on. And I've heard a lot of great feedback of teams working through it together because of the nature of the book. But yeah, some questions.
Just as a general thought, if I brought the idea of disassembling a ministry or dissolving a ministry in my church, I'm going to get the question of, well, what do you consider ineffective?
Yes.
So is there a broad sense of understanding of what you would consider ineffective in ministry?
No, that's great. That's perfect. And I wrote a chapter in the book on introducing change. There's a lot of great resources on change management, right? John Cotter's Leading Change is kind of an industry standard. Within the church, Dr. Rayner wrote a great book, Who Moved My Pulpit? That is, if you haven't read that, I mean, that's a fantastic resource on change management. So I didn't want to rewrite any of that in a chapter. I really instead took it through the lens of how do you introduce change? What are some what's a matrix or a way to evaluate what needs to be changed and what is ineffective? So just take a look at that chapter, and then that'll give you a good framework to move forward and decide that. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, designed to lead Eric Geiger and Kevin Peck. Fantastic book. Yeah? All right. Well, I think the last slide has my email. So there it is, Daniel@newchurches.com. So if you all have any questions moving forward, or as you process this, or if there's anything that I can do to help, just reach out to me. That's where I'm at on social media and my website. And yeah, would love to connect. Thanks for being here, guys.